Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Mass Retirees Weekly Update. Today's Friday, February 16th. I'm Sean Duhamel. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining with us again this week. Now, right out of the chute, I should say, we are delayed this week. We had some technical difficulties with the original video that we filmed, and that's why the email is going out late today. So I am joined this week by Mass Retirees Legislative Liaison, Nancy McGovern. Together, we're going to walk you through what we think is some really good news. Just last week, the Joint Committee on Public Service favorably released 8 mass retirees sponsored pieces of legislation. This is legislation filed here in the state of Massachusetts before the state legislature. In total, we filed 17 different bills at the start of this session. Now, as you probably know, the legislative session here in Massachusetts is a 2-year session. It runs concurrent with the legislators' 2-year terms of office. So this is the second year of that 2-year session. And part of the legislative rules state that in addition to it being a 2-year session, the formal process of the session ends this July 31st. So that means we have about 5.5 months left of the formal legislative session here in Massachusetts. Now, I say formal because the legislature will continue to meet twice a week through the end of this year and actually into the first week of January 2025, when the new legislative session will start after this November's election. But during informal sessions, even though legislation technically can still move forward and be passed into law and sent to the governor and so forth, the legislature is somewhat restricted in the types of bills they can address informally. For instance, any legislation dealing with taxes or the state budget, bonding, things of that nature, by law require a roll call vote. After the formal sessions end in July, there will be no more formal roll call votes for the remainder of 2024. So legislation such as COLAs, large budget items, and a good deal of the bills that we file, unfortunately, have a price tag with it, because one of the things we're focused on is trying to improve your retirement. So that means making improvements to the cost of living COLA base, creating a senior COLA, things of that nature that carry a price tag that are typically addressed through the state budget. So if that's the case, those pieces of legislation most likely would not be addressed during an informal session. But there are other bills that are more technical corrections, language changes that don't necessarily have either a price tag attached to it or a high price tag that could potentially be addressed through the informal process, after July 31st. So one of the things you're going to see in this week's report, and if you've received your March newsletter, which hopefully by now all of you have received the newsletter, or you've tuned in to previous weekly messages, you know that Governor Healy, in her budget that she filed in January, responded to a request from our association to create what we're calling a special commission on the cost of living adjustment, the COLA Commission. This commission is modeled after a very successful COLA Commission that existed back in 1996 that was responsible for the major COLA reform law that was passed in 1997. 26 years later, we're finding ourselves at a similar crossroads in terms of finding new ways to fund and pay for the COLA going forward. So that's really going to be the focus of the COLA legislation going forward, not just over the next 5.5 months, but really into early 2025, when this process will most likely wrap up. It's not going to be a quick process. It's going to happen over the next few months. The commission is being created as part of the FY25 state budget, which will not become law until this summer. So the commission really won't get up and running formally until the summer. So it's going to take a little bit of time to complete that process. In the meantime, the 3 bills that we filed this year relative to the COLA have been held back by the Public Service Committee. We believe that that's intentional. Those pieces of legislation will naturally be handled by this new commission. So it really didn't make any sense for the Public Service Committee to put the proverbial cart before the horse and report those bills out. And we completely understand and we support that position. Before I turn it over to Nancy to talk about the 8 bills that did come out of the committee successfully, I just want to address really a couple of more points. First and foremost, We want to thank the co-chairs of the Public Service Committee, State Senator Mike Brady from the city of Brockton and State Representative Ken Gordon from the town of Bedford. They are the co-chairs of the Public Service Committee. Both of them have a deep commitment to public retirees. They are our close allies, and we are very grateful to them and their staff for reporting these bills out favorably and really having an open door policy with our association. Nancy and our legislative chairman, Tom Bonarigo, work very closely with the committee. And I want to thank both of them for the roles that they have played through the last year or so of moving this legislation forward. And we're happy of the success so far, but our job's not yet done. Our goal, as I said a minute ago, is to pass these different legislative proposals into law to benefit all of you. And while we're very happy with the progress that we're making and the fact that these 8 bills are still moving forward through the legislative process, we still have a lot of work yet to be done. The final point, just in terms of a couple of specific bills, amongst the 8 bills that were released favorably are 2 pieces of legislation that we have now been working on for a number of years. And these proposals are related to veterans benefits, one being the veterans bonus, increasing the bonus from the current $300 benefit to a $1,000 benefit. Now, the veterans bonus is automatically included as part of your base pension if, in fact, you are a veteran under the Massachusetts retirement law. Massachusetts retirement law is a little bit different than the federal definition of veterans, and it could be a little bit confusing. Another point of confusion is that this is not something that you would have needed to apply for. It is automatically included as part of your base pension. It doesn't show up as a separate item on your paycheck stub or anything like that. So if you go looking for it, you're not going to see it. But everyone who is a veteran is automatically getting this benefit as part of your base pension. It was put into effect back in 1957 at the end of the Korean War. It's been at the same dollar amount ever since, and we think it's high time that this benefit finally be increased. In addition to that bill, we also have legislation that would modernize the definition of veteran for those who retired before 2004. In 2004, the legislature changed the definition of veteran going forward prospectively. Unfortunately, it did not benefit or help anyone who was already retired. And this is very typical of changes made to the retirement law, whether it's something that's favorable to us, like new benefits, or unfavorable, like an increase in the pension contribution rates. It is always prospective in nature. I should say almost always. And we think that an exception should be made in this case. We believe that all veterans should be treated equally. That's why we have been pushing for this legislative change to retroactively go back, not to pay a benefit retroactively, but to apply the definition of veteran retroactively. Now, one of the positive aspects of this is that we have some great sponsors of all of our bills, but in particular, the 2 veterans bills and on the state Senate side are sponsored by State Senator John Velas. Senator Velas is the chairman of the Committee on Veterans Affairs. He comes from the Westfield area. He's a great friend of our association. He himself is a veteran. I believe he's still serving in the Army Reserve, if I'm not mistaken. He's an officer. So he has really focused on these issues. And the committee that he co-chairs, along with State Representative Jerry Cassidy from the city of Brockton, they are working on what's known as an omnibus bill. So an omnibus bill is a larger piece of legislation that addresses various aspects of a particular topic. So this particular topic would be veterans benefits. Governor Healy filed her own version of this bill back in November. It's before the Veterans Committee right now, and the belief is that they are working on an omnibus bill that would most likely be reported out sometime this spring, probably before Memorial Day in May. And our hope is that these 2 issues will be included as part of that Veterans Omnibus Bill. But we'll have more information on that in the coming weeks and months as we're getting closer to those deadlines, and we'll certainly share that with all of you. So let me turn it over to Nancy to talk about the other 6 bills that were reported out favorably, and then we'll talk a little bit about the legislative process before we wrap things up. Nancy?
Thanks, Sean. So the rest of the legislation that was reported favorably falls under a couple of different categories. We have two bills that pertain to state retirees specifically. One is an increase in the basic life insurance for state employees and state retirees. It would raise the limit from 5,000 to 10,000. The original limit was set in set in 1985. At the local level, there would not be any additional legislation needed for them to make any type of changes. The second legislation relative to state retirees is relative to the first pension payment. The association had received several reports of there being delays in receipt of the first pension check. So we filed legislation in an attempt to rectify it. The bill would require that if a first full payment cannot be made within the prescribed statute time, that the retiree would receive an estimated payment for their first payment. The third piece of legislation that was released favorably was relative to the option B and C retirees. Those who retired prior to July 1 of 2004 had a different mortality table, and what ended up happening was they were then subject to a different pension structure. So this bill would actually seek to increase the folks that chose option B or C that retired prior to July 1 of 2004 under a specific schedule. This also includes a local option for local retirement boards to make adjustments to those folks that on the local side retired with B and C prior to 7/1 of 2004. We also have two pieces of legislation relative to surviving spouses. One is relative to health insurance. This legislation has two parts. The first would require that a minimum contribution by a local government for a survivor's premium be established. There are several communities that actually do not provide any type of premium split for a survivor. The second piece has to do with survivors who remarry, being able to retain their coverage if they can demonstrate that they are not eligible for any other group health insurance coverage. This Medicare is an exception to that qualification, though. One of the other pieces for survivors has to do with the option D. So this would increase the minimum option D from 500 to 750 for monthly state and teacher survivors. There's also in this legislation a local option for local retirement boards to do the same for their local survivors. The final piece of legislation was relative to protecting what we consider local retirees, and this has to do with the premium split. So this legislation would make any changes, or in particular, any increases on the premium split side for a retiree. If they do the increase, the implementation of that process would only be relative to those who retire after the date of implementation. So anybody that retired prior to that date would be held harmless from the increase. And this is consistent with the way that the state policy has been established and works around retirement dates and premium splits. I think that covers all of our legislation, in addition to the ones that you spoke about.
Great, thank you, Nancy. Now, one of our major priorities that is not a piece of legislation, and I want to address this because I know how important it is to those of you who are insured through the GIC, but you're not eligible for Medicare. Right now, there are about 10,000 retirees who are age 65 or older who are insured through the State Group Insurance Commission who are not Medicare eligible. So in other words, you did not earn your 40 quarters, you were a career public servant, you only paid into the pension system, you were hired prior to April of 1986. Anyone hired after April of 86 does pay into Medicare. But those folks who began working for the government here in Massachusetts prior to April of 86 did not pay into Medicare as a public employee. So just to refresh everyone's memory, there are two ways that you can qualify for Medicare. One is on your own work history. So in other words, if you earn 40 quarters on your own of paying into either Medicare or Social Security, then you automatically are eligible for Medicare Part A for free, and then Part B, and the Part B premium is typically withheld from the Social Security check if you receive one, or you would be billed directly for the Part B premium. The other way that you can become eligible for Medicare A and B is through your spouse's work history. So as long as you've been married to someone for 10 years or more, and if they qualify for Medicare themselves, then that makes you eligible for Medicare. And in our newsletter just recently, I think it was last November, we had a big spread on what we call turning 65 and what you need to do. But that being said, we have thousands of retirees at the state level as well as at the local level of government who never paid into Medicare, maybe whose spouse did not pay into Medicare, or they were never married. So they are not eligible for the Medicare benefit on their own. However, there is a process where the government, as your former employer, can buy into or purchase Medicare credits for you to let you join the program. And as part of that process, the government, whether it be the state of Massachusetts or the local city or town or school district and so forth that you retired from, they pay any additional penalties that would be applied for late enrollment or for the fact that you were not eligible on your own. The retiree is always going to be eligible for the Part B premium, but any additional penalties or payments that are required to join Medicare would be covered by the government. Now, why this is important is very simple. Under Medicare, the monthly insurance premiums as well as the out-of-pocket cost tend to be a lot less expensive than the non-Medicare plans. The reason for this is really twofold. One being that under Medicare, the federal government subsidizes the majority of the cost of the benefit. Part of that is because under Medicare, when you were an active employee and if you were paying into the system, in a way, you're prepaying your eventual retirement health insurance plan under Medicare through the Medicare taxes, the payroll taxes that you would have paid. So that's part of why there's such a difference in cost. The other main factor is that Medicare is specifically designed for retirees. You have to be a minimum of age 65 in order to enroll in Medicare. The whole program is designed and oriented towards retirees, whereby the non-Medicare plans are not geared towards retirees. They're geared toward younger active workers who tend to have different healthcare needs and wants and concerns that are very different than those of retirees in many cases. So there's a huge cost disparity between the non-Medicare plans and the Medicare plans, particularly under the GIC. The GIC, for instance, is a $500 annual deductible applied to the non-Medicare plans. So if you're a retiree who has no option but to be in a non-Medicare plan, right out of the chute, you're responsible for the first $500 of your healthcare costs, where under Medicare, there is no annual deductible. The co-payments under the Medicare plans, particularly for doctor's visits, specialist visits, things of that nature, tend to be a lot less than the non-Medicare plans. That being said, the prescription drug co-payments are the same across the board. Whether you're an active employee or retiree, or regardless of which health insurance plan you're insured under the GIC, everyone's paying the same co-payment amount when it comes to your prescription drug coverage. But the reason why that we support the buy-in of the Medicare buy-in program, as we call it, is that across the board, and with very, very few exceptions, it tends to save money not only for the retirees, but also for the government. This is one of those rare instances of a win-win. Now, at the municipal level, we now have 30 or 40 municipalities across Massachusetts working closely with Blue Cross and Blue Shield, along with Maya, have enrolled their retirees in Medicare. To this date, we have not received a single complaint from any of those retirees or the local sponsors of the plans. It's really been a very beneficial program. The challenge at the state level has been just the sheer number of people involved. Every single retiree has to have their benefits recalculated and an application filled out that's submitted to the federal government. A lot of time and effort, work, administrative processes have to go into this program in order to get it up and running. Over the past few years, the GIC has had some challenges. They went for their procurement plan. Last year, they were implementing procurement, and open enrollment was pretty complicated last year. They also launched their new online platform, MyGIC Link, which has been very, very successful, and retirees have really migrated into that program, which makes it much easier for you to manage your benefits through the GIC by doing so online. We also understand that some upgrades are needed to the GIC's computer system in order for this type of transition to work. All that being said, this is really important to us and to all of you who fall under this category, and we continue to work very closely with the GIC in urging them to get this program up and running. Our hope is that it can begin in 2024, that folks can finally begin to be transitioned into Medicare for the 2025 or FY26 contract year. So it is going to continue to be a major focus of ours. If additional state funding is needed, we'll certainly advocate for that, but we don't know at this point if that's going to be the case or not. But I know how important this is to all of you who are affected, so I wanted to make sure that we explained what's going on in addition to our bills. Now, the last thing that Nancy and I want to point out is that when you look at today's email, and if you're watching this video either on YouTube or through Facebook, if you're a Mass Retirees member, you will receive the email version of this sent to you today. In addition to the video, that email will have a detailed written description of all of the bills that we're talking about, along with some additional information. So if you're a member, look to your email. If you're not receiving our weekly emails, check your spam folder, reach out to the association, give Tricia in our office a call, make sure we have the correct email address for you on file. But every Friday morning, the email version of this message goes out to our members. Now, if you're watching the video and you're not a Mass Retirees member, please consider joining. We represent all retired public employees across Massachusetts, regardless of where you work. So whether you are a teacher, state employee, municipal employee, firefighter, police, we represent all of your interests. We are the only group here in Massachusetts that has that type of statewide presence. So consider joining. We also have an associate member program for those of you who are active employees, but not yet retired. You might be thinking about retirement. Well, we believe that we are a fantastic resource for those of you who are starting to plan for your eventual retirement. Just, the information we're putting out today, I think, is useful to all of you. So we also have an associate member program. You can find all this information on our website, which is massretirees.com. And the link is always included on our YouTube and our Facebook pages as well. So the last thing I want to mention, just in terms of our legislative package, is that in addition to the 8 pieces of legislation that were favorably reported by the committee last week, we also have 6 of our proposals that were sent to a study order. Now, while we're always disappointed when legislation does not move forward, we understand that this is a normal part of the legislative process. It is not reasonable for us to expect that all 17 bills are going to move forward through the process or be passed into law. That's just not possible. It's to have 17 pieces of legislation passed in a year. Talk about lightning striking. You'd have a better chance of hitting the Powerball on Saturday night. It's just not a reasonable expectation. That being said, there are legitimate reasons why bills are sent to study. Now, when a bill is sent to study, the legislature is essentially saying, you know what, this idea or concept or proposal has merit. This is a legitimate issue that we need to look at. However, we're not ready at the present time to take action on it. It could be that more information is needed. More of research needs to take place in order for it to move forward. Or it could be an issue that's expensive, that's just not a priority to be addressed. They cannot possibly address every single problem at the same time. We just don't have the resources for that, no matter how important these issues are. And every single bill we file, we believe is important. We believe it has a legitimate chance of being passed into law. And sometimes, quite literally, it could take years or even decades for these things to be addressed. But that doesn't mean that you give up on it. You just keep chipping away at that block. So the 6 different bills that we filed have been sent to study. We're going to continue to work on these issues behind the scenes, and if necessary, we'll refile them in the future. But I know Nancy has some insight into this as well. Both Nancy and Tom were high-level House staffers in the House of Representatives here in Massachusetts. So both of them have a lot of experience on dealing with these issues and making these types of decisions. So I know Nancy has some insight onto the whole study process as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the fact that just because our legislation may have been sent to study, there may be a similar piece of legislation that another group or individual has filed that actually moved out of the process and was reported favorably. They just chose to act on that version of it. One example is the out-of-pocket cost relative to the GIC. I know that our legislation was sent to a study, but there is another piece of legislation that was filed and is monitored by the Public Sector Task Force, which is part of the AFL-CIO, which we are a part of. So that bill is on the move. So there is definitely that opportunity where there just are similar versions and those kind of move forward. So, we continue to monitor that process and sort of encompass all of those pieces of legislation as sort of part of our legislative package for each session. So just because something specific to us hasn't moved doesn't mean it's still not on the move. So just want to make sure that people understand.
No, that's a really important point. And, and we've talked about this in the past. We work very closely with the AFL-CIO and all of the public sector unions. Nancy is part of that task force. The AFL, even though Mass Retirees is not a union, we're not officially affiliated with any union or the AFL. For decades now, there's a long tradition of us working very closely. And the new AFL-CIO president, Chrissy Lynch, is a good friend of both Nancy and myself. And Chrissy has continued that tradition of making sure that Mass Retirees has a seat at the table and that we're a valued partner of working with our labor allies in moving these bills forward. At times, many of us are filing similar, if not the same, bills addressing the same issues. So as Nancy pointed out, the legislature will pick one vehicle, kind of roll everything together, and that vehicle will move forward. So stay tuned to the newsletter and these weekly updates. We'll keep you posted on what's going on. But if there is a particular bill that you are personally interested in, the numbers are contained within today's email message. Reach out not only to your local legislator, but also the legislative leadership. Whether the bill goes to the House or the Senate, the leadership and your local state rep and your state senator, they want to hear from you. And when they hear from local retirees, it is proof positive that these issues are important and that they should make these things a priority. And it really goes a long way to helping and supplement the day-to-day advocacy work that we're doing on your behalf, for legislators to hear from you, because there is nothing worse than when you go into one of these meetings in the State House or down on Capitol Hill, and you hear the response, well, we're not hearing from anybody on this. I haven't gotten any phone calls from my constituents on this. That presents a problem in and of itself. So if they're hearing from you and they're hearing from us, it just goes a long way towards moving some of this stuff forward. But we're going to wrap things up for today and get this email out to everybody. Again, sorry for the delay. I hope everybody enjoys the weekend. It's sunny outside, but very cold here in Boston. So if you're in a warmer climate, get outside and enjoy the weather. Dorchester's coming out a little bit there, but we will see you again all next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.